After teaching Japanese students online for years, one thing I can tell you with complete confidence is that Japan is not one personality. It never was. People outside Japan tend to imagine a single type of Japanese person: quiet, polite, reserved, and a little hard to read. And while that description might fit some people in some regions, it does not come close to capturing the full picture. Japan is a country of over 125 million people spread across dozens of prefectures, each with its own history, climate, dialect, and cultural identity. And those differences show up in personality, communication style, and how comfortable people are with strangers, in ways that I started noticing very early in my teaching career, and that have only become clearer the longer I have been doing this. Let me start with something that comes up constantly in my classes and that I find genuinely interesting to think about. Many of my Japanese students, when they introduce themselves, will say that they are shy. It comes up so often that I started wondering whether shyness had become a kind of default self-description in Japan, something people say because they have heard it said about Japanese people their whole lives, and so it starts to feel like the accurate word even when it might not be. Shyness and introversion are two different things, which I have talked about in a previous video. Shyness is rooted in anxiety or fear about social situations. Introversion is about energy, how a person recharges, and how much stimulation they can comfortably handle. Japan as a whole does lean toward introversion in many of its cultural values. There is a strong emphasis on not standing out, on group harmony, on careful and measured communication. But that does not automatically make every Japanese person shy. Some of my students who describe themselves as shy are actually perfectly confident people who simply prefer calm, low-key interactions over loud or unpredictable ones. The label gets applied broadly, and I think it flattens something that is actually much more varied. One experience that really stayed with me involved a student I had been speaking with for several years, more than 5 years at that point. In our early conversations, she described herself as an extrovert. She was confident, she had clear opinions, she knew exactly what she wanted from her English lessons, and she was not afraid to say so. But the longer we talked, the more I noticed that her actual life did not look like what most people picture when they think of an extrovert. She did not have a wide social circle. She did not go out with friends regularly. Her world was largely her family, her husband, and her children, and that was it. Eventually, she started describing herself differently. She said she was an introvert, and when I asked what had shifted, it turned out that a previous tutor had told her she was an extrovert because of her confidence and her directness in conversation. She had taken that as fact for years. But confidence and extroversion are not the same thing at all. You can be deeply introverted and still know exactly what you think, say it clearly, and hold your ground in a conversation. She had been misidentified, and she had carried that wrong label for a long time before she worked out what actually fit. Now, let me talk about regional personality differences, because this is where things get really interesting, and where I want to be clear that everything I am sharing is based on personal observation and patterns I have noticed across many conversations. These are generalizations, which means they apply to tendencies, not to every individual. Every person is their own full human being. With that said, the differences are real, and they are noticeable. Osaka is the one that comes up the most. Osaka is often called the comedy capital of Japan, and that reputation exists for a reason. The cultural identity of Osaka has historically been built around merchants, markets, street life, and a kind of humor that is direct, warm, and a little self-deprecating. People from Osaka tend to have a more open and expressive communication style than what is often associated with Japanese people in general. In my experience, when I open a lesson and see a student from Osaka, there is usually an energy in the room that feels different from the start. Something more relaxed, more willing to laugh, more comfortable with spontaneous conversation. Those classes are often the ones I enjoy the most because the back and forth feels natural and easy. Of course, Osaka has its full range of personalities, and I have had students from there who were serious and reserved. But the general pattern holds up often enough that it feels meaningful. Compare that to students from colder northern regions, particularly Hokkaido, which is the northernmost and largest island prefecture in Japan. There is an old saying that the coldness of the climate shapes the temperament of the people, and while that is an oversimplification, I have noticed that students from colder and more rural parts of Japan often present as more reserved and more difficult to warm up in conversation, at least at first. The classes can feel more formal, more careful, more measured. Whether that is actually about the region or about individual personality is hard to say with certainty, but the pattern comes up often enough that I have started paying attention to where a student says they are from early in the lesson, not to judge them but to adjust my energy and my approach to what might be most comfortable for them. There is another pattern I find interesting, which is that students from less internationally famous prefectures often seem hesitant to share where they are from. Most people outside Japan know Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, Okinawa, and maybe Hokkaido. But Japan has 47 prefectures, and many of them are beautiful and historically rich places that simply do not show up in the standard tourist conversation. When I ask a student which prefecture they are from and they respond vaguely, just saying they are from Japan or somewhere in the western part, I have learned that this sometimes comes from a kind of embarrassment or an assumption that I will not know or care about their home region. I always push gently and ask specifically because I genuinely find it interesting. Where a person is from is part of who they are. And when students do open up about their prefecture, the stories that come out about local food, local festivals, local dialects, regional pride, are some of the most engaging parts of any conversation I have. One topic that I want to handle carefully because it involves something serious is the reality of isolation in Japan. In my years of teaching, I have heard stories from students that gave me a clearer picture of how some people in Japan, particularly older adults living alone, can become deeply disconnected from the people around them. There is a documented social phenomenon in Japan where people living alone, especially elderly individuals, can pass away without anyone realizing for days, weeks, or sometimes much longer. This is sometimes called kodakushi in Japanese, which roughly translates to lonely death or solitary death. It is not a myth. It is a real and recognized issue that social workers, local governments, and community organizations in Japan are actively working to address. The fact that a society can be dense with people and yet have individuals who are completely invisible to everyone around them says something important about the gap between being surrounded by others and being genuinely connected to them. I have had students share personal experiences that touched on this, stories about family members who withdrew from the world, who struggled with debt, with shame, with the weight of things they felt they could not talk about. Japan has a complicated relationship with mental health, partly because of cultural values around self-sufficiency, not burdening others, and maintaining a composed outward appearance even when struggling internally. This makes it harder for some people to seek support when they genuinely need it. I am not saying this to be negative about Japan. Every country has its own version of this problem. I am saying it because I think it is important context for understanding why some Japanese people seem guarded in ways that go beyond simple shyness or introversion. Sometimes what looks like reserve from the outside is actually a very practiced and very exhausting effort to manage how much of themselves they let other people see. What I have come to appreciate most from years of these conversations is that getting to know someone's actual personality, as opposed to the personality they lead with in a first impression, takes time, and it takes a specific kind of conversation that creates enough safety for them to stop performing and start just talking. Some students I have spoken with for years are still revealing new things about themselves. Others open up surprisingly fast once they feel that the conversation is genuinely private and genuinely judgment-free. Japan, like anywhere else, contains every kind of human experience. The reserved exterior that many people associate with Japanese culture is real, but it is also a surface, and underneath it there is the full range of human warmth, humor, grief, curiosity, creativity, and contradiction. If you teach Japanese students, or if you interact with Japanese people professionally or personally and want to build a more genuine connection, the single most useful thing I can tell you is this: be patient, be consistent, be genuinely curious, and do not mistake the surface for the whole person. They are rarely the same thing. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, subscribe to help me hit my 2,000 video goal. This is my unfiltered diary of solo living in the Philippines. From the tough days in the ESL classroom to my journey learning Japanese and Korean. Yes, I'm still a beginner. If you'd like to support my work and my retirement fund, check out the buy a treat for my pets link in the description. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update. Thanks for being part of the journey.
See you then.